Greetings, lords and ladies. There's much to be said about Avowed right now, and most of it is very positive. I was already very much looking forward to the game, but recent showings at Gamescom have bolstered my confidence in this game severalfold, as has its delay until the 18th of February 2025, which will serve to polish the game further and give it enough breathing space so it doesn't have to compete with other coveted titles. It's looking good, but before proceeding, let me say at the outset that I am very biased, as I absolutely love the Pillars universe and Aora. But with that said, let's launch right into it, starting with the story elements. And I hope you end up looking forward to this game as much as I do. And a small spoiler warning, as I will be talking about story elements from the Pillars series. Avowed takes place approximately 3 years after the events of Deadfire. The consequences of Aethys' actions have been felt by many, and I have little doubt that once again, the gods figure prominently into the story of Avowed. In the demo, we encounter for the first time a Dawn godlike, a godlike of Aethys called the Oracle of Aethys, named Sargamas, who seeks to bring back some piece of Aethys via a shard so as to confront him and prosecute him for his many destructive actions. To do this, he has crafted an Audra construction designed to capture souls, which he believes, with the shard of Aethys, will bring the god back from silence. Such machines should be familiar to you if you played Pillars of Eternity. We are told, for example, that Aethys' romp through the Deadfire killed thousands, and we've yet to find out what damage the breaking of the wheel has wrought upon Aora. Sargamas, in his frustration, is desperate to once again speak to Aethys, which is why he tasked you with finding a shard, which he used to use to communicate directly with the god, and which he refers to as a piece of the god, calling it the Splinter of Aethys. And on a side note, Sargamas is but one of the several characters in the game voiced by the legendary Matthew Mercer. But as an envoy of Adir, and that is your title in this game and how you will be referred to, you are tasked with finding out what has happened to a lost expedition, as well as an artifact, the very one that Sargamas seeks, and thus these two tasks, as it turns out, overlap a great deal. You also have your first companion, Kai, a coastal Amawa, with you, who is voiced by none other than Brandon Keener, who voiced the legendary Garrus Vicarian from Mass Effect, and minus the synth voice of Garrus, sounds exactly like him, which I argue is a plus, as it feels like having Garrus with you once again. And who knows, maybe even Kai does some calibrations too. Thus begins the quest, and you and Kai explore the ruins in detail, eventually finding the lost expedition, and in doing so, discover that they have been slain, but have not been dead for very long, deducing that the Oracle of Aethys is ultimately behind these murders, in an effort to siphon their souls and use them for his giant animancy experiment. Returning back to Sargamas, you confront him on what he's done, and this can have multiple outcomes depending on the dialogue. You can lie to him about finding the shard, or tell him the truth, and then decide to help him or not. When his initial plan does not work, he insists that it requires a godlike soul, and asks you to sacrifice yourself since you're a godlike as well, which itself has several options. You can convince him through the arcane scholar background that his plan is doomed and will not work, go along with it, tell him that the soul of a godlike of Aethys is much better suited to the task than yours, or you can fight him as he seeks to kill you for your soul. I think we can see choice and consequence well on display in this demo, in the traditional Obsidian fashion, and I do wonder how the outcome would be different if you had talked him down. But regardless, one thing is very clear from this limited demo. Whilst Pillars of Eternity might not continue as a franchise, the world of Aora will. The fact that this is set only 3 years after the events of Deadfire, with obvious direct tie-ins to that game, makes me all the more convinced of this. Now here's a tidbit, since you might ask me how we know it's set 3 years after Deadfire, and that is revealed in the Journal of a Dead Expedition member. The last entry is dated 2831 AI, and Deadfire took place in 2828 AI. Now I believe this is just the tip of the iceberg, of the many things that will be tied into Deadfire now that we know this takes place directly after that game, and in particular after the world-shaking events of Deadfire that fundamentally changed the relationship of gods and mortals. I'll warn you now, as I will be mentioning spoilers regarding Deadfire. Aethys' intention in Deadfire was to force both gods and mortals to confront the truth about their own nature, that the gods are artificial constructs created to manipulate and guide Kith, and that mortals have taken the bait and bought into it. Aethys simply wanted everyone exposed to the truth, and to take action in accordance with that. And in the best possible interpretation of his actions, he wanted everyone, both mortal and gods, to be free. Central to all of this is the metaphysical concept and physical reality of the wheel, the vehicle of reincarnation in Aora, which the gods had molded over 2 millennia to work in an orderly and predictable manner. As though it existed before, it was chaotic and unpredictable. But in Deadfire, Aethys destroys the machinery in Okaizu that guided the wheel and made it work, and now both mortal lives and gods' lives, that depend on mortal essence, are thrown into chaos. Avowed will almost certainly be addressing this world state and the consequences of Aethys' actions. And it's entirely possible that the very plot of this game itself revolves around the metaphysical issues and problems that emerged after Aethys did what he did. After all, those of us familiar with Aora are all too acquainted with metaphysical maladies. So what's another one at the end of the day, called the Dream Scourge this time, to add to the list of the others? All in all, I am exceptionally pleased that Avowed continues where Deadfire left off, and hopefully answers many of the questions we have concerning the ending of that game, and indeed expands upon the lore that much more. It's too early to say, but it seems very likely that the developers wanted to keep the lore of the world going, and indeed still want to appeal to fans of the Pillars series, and I for one am very appreciative of that. Moving beyond the story, we also get to see extensive gameplay, and it looks promising and much improved on from what we saw of the first reveals. It appears that in particular, the developers have listened to feedback about reactivity in combat, and shall we say, oomph, in the sense of weightiness and heft. And a number of people who have played through the demo have confirmed this, that the striking in combat feels like it has weight and impact to it, for example. The systems of Pillars of Eternity have coalesced into something much more compact, almost certainly for budgetary reasons. So you end up with a conjoining of rogue and ranger, fighter and barbarian, and wizard and druid, possibly with other classes being mixed in here and there as well. Although this might be an understandable turnoff to some, I think it's fairly reasonable considering the budget limitations. This is, after all, a AA game. And we know you can play essentially as a single class, or mix and match as much as you want. I myself am considering the fighter barbarian route for my first run. What's also a nice touch to the UI and icons is that much of it has been ported over from Pillars, and thus is familiar. And we know we will be using the Pillars version of stat distribution with similar effects in Avowed in terms of how it affects combat, but also how it affects dialogue, with high perception, for example, appearing to be very useful and helpful, as well as intellect, to name but 2 attributes we could observe at work in the demo. The companions, though not directly controllable, still seem to have importance and impact in terms of the combat, and can be programmed tactically to make use of abilities in key situations, based on what we can glean from the demo, and will make their own contributions whilst actually causing real damage, something you often miss when it comes to many companions in games that barely cause a scratch of damage. And we now know that there will be bombs in the game, which is always a welcome thing to be used both in combat and as creative solutions to obstacles and pathfinding in the game. Although initially it appeared to be the weakest aspect of the game, the combat has been shored up significantly, and whilst it isn't perfect, it's shaping up to be fun and varied, and the mixed class system really helps to facilitate that. But ultimately, I think it's most important that people with absolutely zero experience with Aora and the Pillars universe are reporting having really enjoyed the demo, having played it, and finding the combat fun. And this is essential if you want Avowed to sell well. For us Pillars fans, Avowed is an easy day one purchase and win, but it's not enough for Obsidian to win over the hearts and minds of Pillars fans, i.e. preaching to the choir, and they do seem to be doing a pretty good job of convincing the non-initiated to want to play, and I say selfishly, that this is a good thing, because I personally never want the world of Aora to stop. It has some of the most interesting and best lore ever devised in an RPG setting, and if Obsidian can pull it off in the form of an action RPG that nonetheless captures the spirit of Pillars and the lore of Aora, then I'm all here for it, and I sincerely hope you are too. Now, leading up to the release of Avowed on the 18th of February 2025, I plan on doing some preparation videos, going over some basic lore, as well as possible theory crafting, so tune in for those, and as always, thank you for stopping by, and if you like my content, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel, It'd be much appreciated, and I'll check you out next time. Take care.